Welcome, everyone. My name is Mike Molesky, and I'm sitting in today for Hannah McCarthy, the regular host of John's weekly town hall series. Today's topic of discussion is reopening the Pennsylvania economy. John's joined this week by Jeff White, a local small business owner. Jeff and his wife own 3 hair salons that have been shut down since March and will still not be able to reopen under the new yellow edicts from Governor Wolf. In order to run things smoothly today, we'll be utilizing the chat feature. As questions may pop up throughout the course of this town hall, please go ahead and type them up. You can find that if you move your cursor in the lower part of the screen, you'll see a chat icon. You can click on that. I'll be aggregating those questions as we go along to remove duplicates, and we'll be combining like questions. That way we can make best use of everyone's time. We're also asking everyone to remain on mute for the duration of the town hall to minimize background noise and distractions. I guess in order to get this started, I'd like to introduce John Emmons. He's a candidate for the Pennsylvania 6th Congressional District, which encompasses all of Chester County and the southern portion of Berks County up to Reading. John is a manufacturing and operations executive with experience managing employees and facilities across the United States, as well as in countries around the world, including Germany and India. John has a degree in chemical engineering from SUNY Buffalo. John and his beautiful wife, Allison, have been married for over 39 years. They have 3 children and 3 grandchildren. John, I think, is running to, if you listen to him, to fix our healthcare system, our broken immigration system, and most importantly and pertinently right now, growing the United States economy, specifically here in southeastern Pennsylvania, and creating good jobs for folks here in the Pennsylvania 6th Congressional District. John, I hope that introduction is good enough, and I'd like to introduce you and turn it right over to you.
All right. Thank you, Mike, and welcome everyone. Thank you again for joining in. Thank you for sharing part of your Saturday morning with us. I hope you're all well. These are very challenging times, and I hope that you're all coping with this. I know it's been bothering me for a long time, and I'm pretty rock solid. So if it's getting to me, I suspect it's getting to a lot of people, and that's one of the reasons why we're talking about this issue. I hope our original plan had been to have actual town halls, but with COVID-19 and the various lockdowns, that hasn't been able to happen. We do hope to get to that at some point, but with the way things are going right now, it looks like we're going to have to continue for a while longer with the virtual town halls, and then hopefully within another few weeks are able to do real town halls and maybe even do a combination of the two. As Mike said, the topic for today is reopening the Pennsylvania economy. Now, that's been our topic now for about 3 weeks. If you recall, if any of you were able to join previous town halls, 2 weeks ago, we had on the commissioners from Berks County. They gave a great account for what's going on in Berks County, the relationship with Governor Wolf, the various things that they're trying to do. That was very enlightening and insightful. Last week, we had on Michelle Kickline here from Chester County, and she gave a great account, again, for what's happened, what that interaction is like with the governor and so forth. So I think really good 2 lead-ins to today. But some people have asked the question about why are we continuing to talk about this? Why are we going to do a 3rd session on this? Well, I think it's very simple and very straightforward. The lockdown continues. People are hurting. There's no doubt, as we feel it ourselves, but virtually this is impacting everyone. When you step back and you look at what's happening, the arbitrary decisions and dictates continue out of Harrisburg. The moving of the goalposts continues. The picking of winners and losers continues. So that has not changed yet. We need to continue to push and do everything we can until we get back to where we need to be. The unemployment rate here in Pennsylvania is 30%. That's 1 out of every 3 people in Pennsylvania is unemployed right now. And if you factor in some of the other aspects of that, it's probably more like 4 out of 10 or maybe even higher. So that is really something that is disturbing. On top of that, we're seeing bad trends in regard to physical health and mental health. And I could go into that in great detail, but I won't quite yet. But we are seeing this affect people's health in a number of ways. And even in more ways, it's starting to impact people's mental health. So that it really is impacting every person. And it's imperative that we get through this sooner rather than later. So again, in the past 2 weeks, we've had the good fortune of having the county leaders on. And this week I wanted to shift a bit, and I wanted us to hear from someone who is actually living the nightmare, a small business owner that has been shut down during this time frame, dealing with all the issues associated with that, trying to prepare for restarting, but not having a clear picture of when that's going to be, what it's going to look like. So Jeff White was kind enough to volunteer to be my guest today. Mike gave a nice overview of Jeff. So what we'll do at this point is we'll turn this virtual podium over to Jeff, and Jeff will recount what he's been through, what it's been like, what it looks like going forward, and then we'll pick up after that. So Mike, if you could hand it over to Jeff, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, John. Appreciate the forum today. It's a beautiful morning here in Chester County. I wish we had the ability to operate our business. I'd like to say a few prepared remarks, and then feel free to send your questions into Mike, and I'm happy to stay on as long as necessary to answer any questions. But at this point, I'd like to begin telling my story. But it's not just my story. It's the stories of hundreds or thousands of other small business owners, not just here in Chester County, but throughout Pennsylvania. Let me tell you a little bit about where we came from and where we started. My name is Jeff White. My wife, Lauren, and I own 3 Sport Clips locations throughout Chester County. We both grew up in working class families in Delaware County. I'm a graduate of Sun Valley High School in Aston, and Penn State University. My wife is a graduate of Ridley High School and Widener University. We have lived most of our lives in southeastern Pennsylvania, and we have chosen to call Glenmore in Chester County our home. This is where we chose to raise our family and start our business. At the tail end of the great financial crisis, we began to look at ways to diversify our income, to not be dependent upon corporate America. We started investigating franchise concepts and thought that Sport Clips was something that was missing in the Chester County marketplace. For those not familiar, Sport Clips is a hair salon that caters to men and boys in a sports-themed environment. And that'll be the end of the commercial right there. We signed up as franchisees in Chester County in 2012 with a commitment for 3 stores. We opened our first store in Exton in 2014, followed by our second store in Berwyn the following year. We finally opened our 3rd location in Westchester in 2018. Other than staffing issues, everything was really humming along. And when I say staffing issues, I mean we couldn't find enough good quality hairstylists to keep our stores fully staffed at all times. The battle for talent in this specific industry is fierce. The free market was telling us that we needed to be more aggressive. In an effort to recruit and retain the best hairstylists, we pay above market compensation with a generous bonus structure. At the beginning of 2020, we began offering health, dental, and vision insurance with a substantial employer contribution towards those premiums. Our full-time stylists earn a solid, dependable, middle-class living. I tell you all that because now we have the opposite problem. We have 3 shuttered storefronts. We have 24 empty chairs, and we have 27 furloughed employees collecting unemployment. In mid-March, Governor Wolf ordered all non-essential businesses to close their doors for 2 weeks with the stated goal of flattening the curve. This was the early stages of the outbreak in the United States, and as a country, we had a lot to learn about COVID-19. As good citizens, we complied. We did not want to endanger our staff or our guests. During those first 2 weeks of the shutdown, the number of positive cases continued to rise fairly significantly on a daily basis. The shutdown order was extended for another 2 weeks. It was at this time, in mid-April, when you began to see the numbers of daily new cases start to level off. During this whole time, the hospital system was never in jeopardy of being overwhelmed by COVID-19 cases. By the end of April in Chester County, the curve had been flattened. Also by this time, we had learned a lot more about COVID-19. Social distancing had become the norm. Facial masks were now a fashion statement. At this point, Governor Wolf should have trusted the citizens of Pennsylvania and of Chester County to be able to do the right things to keep each other safe. He did not. He came up with some gimmicky, color-coded scheme to maintain control over our lives that even he doesn't follow. It was at this point that it became clear to me that this was no longer about the virus. This was about politics and control. His metrics are arbitrary. His classification of what can be open and what must remain closed are nonsensical. How does the virus know to only infect those that work or patronize small businesses? How does it know to leave the good folks at Home Depot alone? How does it make any sense that you can go to a state-run liquor store, but you can't go to your local clothing boutique? Why are you not able to sit outside in the sun at your child's graduation ceremony or a Little League baseball game? Did you know that today you can go buy fireworks
Donna,
and drive by?
I don't know how to unmute this for John Emmons. He has a businessman on here I wanted to watch.
What's it?
I don't know how to unmute this. He has a businessman on here in Chester County that's talking about the virus.
Hold on just a second,
I
Jeff,
don't know how to unmute it. I
if you
got him
don't
on,
mind.
but I can't hear him.
Hold on. Jeff, hold on just a second, please. Apologize for that, Jeff.
That's fine. Are we good to resume?
We are good to resume. Please continue. Thank you.
Great. Did you know that today you can go buy fireworks and then drive to your local bar to pick up cocktails to go, but you can't get a haircut and you can't go out to dinner with your family? In what universe does any of this make sense? And by the way, have you seen the governor on TV? His hair looks great. He doesn't seem to be living by the rules that he has forced upon us. Do as I say, not as I do. I keep hearing the governor and other Democratic leaders say we're all in this together. It sure as hell doesn't feel like it. I bet it really doesn't feel like it to the 2.3 million Pennsylvanians that have filed for unemployment since this crisis began. Does the governor think that when he finally waves his magic wand and lets all businesses reopen, that they're going to be able to? Each day of this prolonged shutdown continues, more and more small business owners will make the hardest realization and decision of their lives, that they have been financially devastated and they will never reopen. It doesn't need to be this way. The governor thinks that he's smarter than every single one of you. He knows what's best for your business and your family. I can assure you, he does not. He's playing a purely political game. If this was about saving lives, he would have focused the state's resources where they were needed the most. He would have flooded nursing homes and senior living facilities with personnel, equipment, supplies, and whatever else they needed to remain safe. Instead, he has taken a sledgehammer to the Pennsylvania economy and the lives of many small business owners. A few weeks ago, the governor called small business owners cowards and deserters for wanting to reopen their businesses. I watched Democratic representatives in the Capitol in Harrisburg on Thursday night say they couldn't trust small business owners to operate their businesses safely. Yet they can trust a teenage cashier at the Wawa. What an insult. It's time for a little education for our governor and friends on the other side of the aisle. We have invested thousands of dollars in PPE and cleaning supplies ready to be deployed when we are open. There is no one more invested in keeping my hair salons clean, safe, and virus-free than me and my team. As part of their education and state license requirements, my stylists are trained and certified in maintaining a sanitary salon. That's right, not only does each of our salons have a state license, so do each of our stylists. The state is free to inspect at any time and shut us down if we are not complying with state requirements. Even more stringent than the state is our franchisor. System-wide, our franchisor has established strict protocols that must be followed before we are allowed to reopen. And this includes additional training and sanitation. Many of these protocols are also included on the Restore Chester County section of the chesco.org website. This is a great online resource for information and ideas on how all small business owners can keep their respective stores safe. And even more discerning than either the state or the franchisor are my clients. If a client comes into my shop and senses that it's dirty, they're going to turn right around, walk out the door, and make sure everyone on social media knows about it. So what can we do to stop the madness? If you haven't already, please reach out to your state reps, your state senators, your U.S. House reps, your U.S. senators, county commissioners, and anyone else that you can think of to continue to apply pressure. If you have done this already, keep it up, at least once a week. It's working. A handful of elected Democratic politicians have already begun speaking out against this prolonged lockdown. Most of these folks are up for election in November. They know that without us being able to vote against Governor Wolf, the voters will be holding them accountable. As this continues to linger, the chorus will get louder, and they will force Wolf to loosen his grip. We must make this happen sooner rather than later to help save as many small businesses as we can. That wraps up my prepared remarks. I thank you for the time this morning, and I'm happy to take any and all questions.
Okay. Maybe a couple from me first, Jeff. First of all, could you talk just a little bit about the economic struggles that you're having? Because obviously, I think everyone probably realizes this, but just because you're shut down, it doesn't mean that your expenses have stopped. You still are incurring expenses that you need to cover in and above what you're doing with the sanitation things and the PPE. So could you just speak to that for a second?
Sure. So John, since we have been closed, which I believe our last day of operation was March 16th, we have incurred $45,388 of expenses. We have incurred $0 in revenue. I now have $7,950 of expenses that are currently due, and that does not include my annual taxes of $36,000. How am I supposed to pay those obligations? Where is that money coming from? I have no ability to earn revenue in my shops, and I have no clear guidance or understanding of when that will occur.
Great. I think that really paints the picture, because we hear people talk about it, but we don't often hear numbers, and I think that helps us all understand just that much better what you and many other people like you are going through. Well, as you look forward a little bit, assuming we are able to open up at some point here, what concerns do you have for after you open up?
Well, the primary concern I have, John, is a capacity issue. And I understand that at least for a time until we have this thing fully under control, we are not going to be able to operate at the capacity that we once were. That being said, that impacts our ability to earn revenue. So we're going to be earning much less revenue than we were prior to the pandemic, but we're still going to have the same cost structure. So now the entire dynamics of the business has been turned upside down because the whole income and expense formula is turned on its axis.
Yes, that's great. Some of the things that I've heard in talking to small business owners over the past month, I would say, One concern that they have as they go back into business is one, the constantly changing health and safety guidelines. That we've seen it change over time. There's probably little reason to believe that it won't continue to change. So just the stress and the pressure of keeping up and not being in violation is one thing that I've heard people talk about. One of the other things is I'm going to go through a lot of trouble to reopen. And how do we know that if there's an uptick in COVID-19 later in the fall, that Governor Wolf won't come right back around and lock down again? So it's kind of the concept of, should I even bother to reopen or not? Will it be worth it? What's the probability of that happening? So that's also wearing on people's minds. Another thing is the one that you mentioned, which I'm not sure everyone has a full appreciation for, and that is, as we reopen, what is the experience going to be like for business owners with what I would call bad press? You talked about the social media. If someone comes in and for one reason or another isn't happy, are they going to put out Facebook posts? Are they going to do letters to the editor? Are they going to make life very difficult for small business owners? I think that's really weighing on people's minds as well, not to mention the potential of lawsuits. If someone were to happen to come down with it and they don't know where they got it. So all those things are really weighing on people's minds and weighing on those decisions about whether or not I should reopen. So I think those are just some of the things I've heard. You've mentioned some of them, they're real. It all adds to the stress, the anxiety, and the decision about whether I should reopen or not. I think there are good sources out there. Jeff mentioned one of those, the restorechestercounty.org. Chester County has done a very nice job pulling together resources for small business owners who are looking to reopen. We heard a couple weeks ago about from Berks County, Rebuilding Berks. That's sponsored by the Greater Berks Chamber Alliance there. So there are some very good, I think the counties are doing a very good job in helping people prepare. Everything from specific information, webinars. I think it was great to hear Jeff talk about the parent company even having their requirements, because quite frankly, I think most of you have heard my story. My parent company, we got through this whole process without one case of COVID-19 following the same guidelines that Jeff's talking about. So we've demonstrated over and over again that this can be done. Now we have to do it. For those up in the audience, what we'd love to hear today, the next few days, are what challenges lie ahead for you. Some of you may be small business owners. Some of you may be larger business owners, but feel free to contact our campaign and tell us what challenges lie ahead for you. We'd really like to hear that, and hopefully maybe we can help amplify that. One of the other things that we've been hearing recently, this doesn't go so much to small business owners, but it's something that's looming out there on the horizon that is starting to get people talking more and more. And that has to do with what's going to happen at the end of August or in September with regard to school. Because so much is going to be impacted by what happens with decisions being made around schools. So for example, what schedule will the schools be operating on? We've heard stories about how they're talking about only maybe having 10 children in a classroom, but because of that, having to have some type of staggered schedule or extended schedule. So, that has major implications, because what happens if you're say a mother who has a job that maybe can't do it all from home? What are the implications there about, will she be able to maintain, or in some cases, will dad be in a position to maintain a job and take care of the children if the children aren't in a normal school schedule? So there's all these different considerations that are continuing to build and wear on people. And we're going to have to deal with those here very, very soon, because these are just around the corner. Now, I just want to build on what Jeff was saying for a moment. You know, realistically, I think the answer is to reopen as close to the old normal as possible. Obviously, we say this every time we make this recommendation. We need to protect the vulnerable. We know how to protect the vulnerable. We've demonstrated that for those who followed the guidelines. Obviously, we want to protect the elderly and those with underlying health conditions, but we need to reopen. But as Jeff said, as so many other people have said, it doesn't look like Wolf is planning on doing that anytime soon, certainly in a broad way. So what we are left with then is to put maximum pressure on Democrat state reps and senators. They're the ones who can bring the pressure to bear on Wolf. Continue to put good legislation in front of him. If he vetoes it, override that legislation. That is really the only and best path forward. That has to happen. So Jeff mentioned it, I'll mention it again. Melt down the phone lines. Don't do it every day, not every week, every day, call. It does work over time. I mean, in essence, folks, it comes down to a basic tenet of human nature. Where are you getting more pressure from? Are you getting more pressure from your constituents, or are you getting more pressure from the Democrat Party or the party leadership, whichever party it happens to be? What we have to do is to ramp up the pressure and do it hard enough and long enough so that they feel it and they understand it, that if they continue this, they are not going to be reelected in November. But that's what it's ultimately going to come down to, is where is the most pressure brought to bear? So melt down the phone lines. Also, for the protests and the rallies, have those right at the legislator's office. It makes a big impact when you have 50 people outside your office having a protest rally. Obviously, well-behaved, but drawing attention to that representative or that senator that they are not supporting the people of Pennsylvania will have an impact. So that's what we need to focus on. There is an election coming up in 5 months. It's all state reps and it's half of the state senators. So one thing we could do is to look at that, and obviously there are some geographical realities that we need to look at, but which ones of those state reps and those senators who are going to be running, which of them are most vulnerable? That's where we need to apply the greatest pressure. We know that there's some areas in Pennsylvania where a Republican wouldn't stand a chance. So we probably don't want to put much energy there. But there are many other areas where there are Democrats who are vulnerable. They're first-term Democrats. They'd be running for a second term. They're vulnerable. That's who we need to concentrate on. So I think at the end of the day, what we need to do is make it perfectly clear as to who is responsible for this disaster. That's what it comes down to. Who is responsible for this disaster? And that weight needs to be brought to bear now and in November. So let me pause there for a moment. One thing I did want to mention too, I'll mention it now before I forget, because when we get into the Q&As, my mind will probably go elsewhere. There was an open letter that was published yesterday. It's an open letter to state legislators across southeast Pennsylvania. And it's an extremely well-written letter. I'm not sure who penned it, but it was sponsored by all of the Chamber of Businesses in Southeast PA. And we're going to put this up on our Facebook page after the meeting, but you ought to read this. It is extremely well written. It was very articulate, and it makes all the points that Jeff and I have been making. So that's a good one to share with people. And I think it's certainly worthy of our attention. Spread it around to friends, neighbors. We need to crank up the pressure. We need to apply more pressure from our side than what a party leadership or a Governor Wolf will bring to bear on those state reps and state senators. So with that, I will pause, and I'll turn it back over to Mike, who will be guiding us with the Q&A.
Thank you, John. I think the first question that came up that would make sense is, I guess, have there been any cases brought before the Pennsylvania courts challenging the governor's orders like they did in Wisconsin? And because the common theme I've seen is people have been contacting legislators and commissioners but getting nothing back from them. So is there a remedy through the courts that's possible?
Well, the only one I'm aware of was one that I think it went to the Supreme Court back a couple of months ago. I've lost track of time now, but I think the Supreme Court was asked to look at a case which brought into question whether or not Governor Wolf had the authority to do what he's done. And the Supreme Court basically decided not to take that on, in essence, I guess agreeing that he did have the authority to call a state of emergency. That's the only one that I'm aware of. Jeff may be aware, or maybe even one of the other attendees may be aware of other ones.
I think from the legal perspective, that's certainly an avenue that can be pursued, but the wheels of justice move very slow, and we're much likely to get action from the legislature before anything would be decided by the courts, which is why it is so important to continue to put pressure on those legislatures. In the House on Thursday night, they passed a resolution to remove the emergency declaration powers from Wolf. That now moves on to the Senate. The Senate will pass it. That will then go to Wolf's desk. He will veto it. And then we need to marshal as many Democrats as we can to our side to try to override his veto. We're not that far off. This is going to take a couple more weeks. We need to continue to put the pressure on those Democrats for the next couple weeks and pull as many on our side as possible. We're not that far from getting the votes that we need to override Wolf's veto.
Yeah, Jeff, what do we think the current count is? Are we about 7 votes shy right now?
In the House, we're about 7 or 8 votes shy for an override of the veto.
Okay. Good.
Okay, well, Jeff, a question for you from our attendees here. Has Chester County said they will enforce the governor's order, because Giovanni's down in Media, which is right across from the sheriff's office, and the Delco courthouse has opened, and Delco's not said they won't enforce the law. I guess is there any thought that either by yourself or with other members of your industry defying the governor's order and sort of challenging him to try and pull licenses and things like that?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I applaud what Nicole was doing down in Media, but she is making that decision for herself. She is a licensed cosmetologist through the state, and she owns and operates her own salon. So she is making that decision. If the state wants to come in and pull her cosmetology license, they can, and they can shut her down. My franchisor has given us an edict that we are not allowed to reopen unless the state has given us the go-ahead. At the same time, I cannot ask my stylist to put their licenses and their livelihoods on the line to make that sort of political stand. If they came to me and they offered it, I would think about it, but I can't ask them to do that. It's not a fair position to put them in.
Thank you, Jeff. I think that's
But to those folks out there, if it was me and it was my cosmetology license and I wasn't part of a franchise system, I would absolutely go in and open the shop. But that's a decision I would be able to make for myself. I don't want to force my decisions upon other people the way Governor Wolf is forcing his decisions on us.
No, Jeff, and I think it's very important that people recognize the larger impact of a situation like this, where it's not just you personally who'd be in jeopardy, but your employees as well. And so I think it's something that's not often seen by people who don't understand the nuances of how licensing works in your industry. The next question we'll take is for John, and this one came in via email, but it said, if the U.S. House of Representatives is no longer going to Washington, D.C., and they're not going to be participating in committee hearings the way they normally do, does that mean that our representatives really aren't doing their full jobs? And should they still be making their full salary and full benefits? Is there any recourse as taxpayers? I guess the person felt that, how do we even know if our representatives are voting, and isn't this really taxation without representation?
Well, I tend to think it is. I think there's a couple of facets of this one. The part of the question was, do the taxpayers have any recourse? Not immediately, but you can do us a lot of good if you elect people like me in November to go down and help drain the swamp. I believe very strongly that people should not, that not only congressmen and senators, that they shouldn't be paid in situations like this. I think their whole staff shouldn't be paid, because going back to that point about pressure, if it's just the congressmen, most of them are independently wealthy, certainly after a few terms. Wonder how that works. But so it's hard to bring pressure on them from a monetary standpoint, but their staffs are not quite in the same situation. So I think that that should be the case. Now, from what I've seen over the last 48 hours, that's certainly not the case. There's a Republican representative who has put forth legislation to make that the law, but I doubt seriously if he will get a lot of support on that. Something that I heard last night on TV is that there's actually, it's against the Constitution to withhold pay. And what they were talking about last night is, if they do withhold pay, then that will basically be put in an account and given to them at the end of the term. Well, that's really not much of a disincentive. So right now, I don't think there is anything that really has any teeth in it that would afford that. But I think it should, quite honestly. And the other part of that answer, the second facet, is this whole business about the proxies. I think it's reprehensible that the House, especially Nancy Pelosi and her friends, basically pushed through that new rule that allowed for proxy voting. So in essence, you have representatives who have been duly elected by their constituents who now are giving their voting power to someone else. To me, that's a worse situation. One is not to be there, but then to give your vote to someone else, in essence, you're saying you're no longer representing the people from that district. And I hope that rule is not extended when it runs out, because I think it's one of the worst things I've seen come out of the House of Representatives, and there's been some pretty bad things. But I think that's just another example of Nancy Pelosi trying to gain as much power and control as she can. She can actually control what happens in the House with 20 people.
Well, thank you, John. I think the next question we have is for Jeff, and there's a couple different questions around this theme. But obviously, even when we go to the governor's green status, there will still be restrictions placed upon a business like yours. Is it going to even be possible for you to recoup any of these horrendous losses you're taking if you're operating at a quarter or a third or half capacity?
Well, I mean, I don't think you can ever recoup your losses. You can't regain a sale that never happened. So in terms of recouping money that's been lost, or revenue that has been lost over this time period, that's gone. That's in the black hole. It's never going to come back again. So what we have to do is focus on how we're going to operate our business going forward. And unfortunately, this is going to be a reality, not only in my business, but in many businesses, especially the service businesses. Prices are going up. That's just the way it is. And that's not just because the small business owners are greedy. The small business owners are going to be running at limited capacity, and they're going to be putting in additional health and safety and sanitation protocols, and that comes with a cost. Additional hand sanitizer, masks, all kinds of PPE equipment and cleaning products, in addition to what they were already using. And unfortunately, a good portion of that is going to get pushed down to the customers. So there's going to be some inflation that is a byproduct of the prolonged shutdown.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. John, it's more of a local question or a state level question, but I think it's one that's on people's minds. Can you speak to your opinions on these, potential property tax freezes? Is it really, can we expect working class families who've been obviously horrendously impacted by this? Can we expect them to be able to afford district by district increases in a time when many people are out of work or at reduced incomes?
I would be happy to comment on that. I think the short answer is no. I have been a proponent for a long time of changing the model by which we fund our schools, because I think the whole system of property taxes is somewhat biased, if you will. If you go back 8 years ago, I was working very hard to try to get the HB 76 bill passed. I know it wasn't a perfect bill, but my concern is that with the current system, by and large, especially as it continues to ratchet up year on year, that you as a homeowner really don't own your home, you rent it. And it just becomes, especially now, if you're on a fixed income, that increase that you get every year just makes it more and more difficult. And what we see in too many areas, especially those areas that have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on new facilities and things like that, that you get to a point where people can no longer stay in their home, and they have to sell their home and move out. And it starts to change the nature of the community. So I would be a proponent that we not increase those taxes and find ways to not continually add costs every year to where we have to, and in many cases, max out on those tax increases. It's unfair to those people who are on fixed incomes.
Well, thank you, John. I guess, Jeff, there was a comment that a few of our attendees thought was appropriate, and that might be that you should, for all these increased costs that you're going to be incurring that have to be passed on, to label them as a Governor Wolf surcharge on all your fees.
I like the thought. I don't think my franchisor would appreciate wading into the political waters.
Mm-hmm.
But on a more serious note, I guess a couple of questions came up around how you feel about actually getting your employees back in light of the fact that they're obviously may in fact be making more on unemployment with this $600 that the federal government's kicking in. Will they want to come back, in your opinion, or is that going to be yet another challenge for your business?
No, it's certainly going to be a challenge. We had a meeting with our managers yesterday and had that conversation. Our managers are ready to get back to work. Are they making a little bit more on unemployment with the additional $600? Probably. But they also know that that's not forever. And as a result of this shutdown, there are many salons that are never going to reopen. So I'm going to go from the situation that I had leading into this, where I couldn't find enough stylists to staff my salon, to maybe being able to attract some new employees from some salons that have closed. So our plan is to go out and offer all of our employees their jobs back once. We're only going to offer it to them once. If they want to stay on unemployment and keep collecting the extra $600, that's fine. But at that point, we're then going to recruit for that position. And if it's filled when they're ready to come back, I'm sorry, we've replaced you. So I think our stylists, and particularly the ones that think more long term and big picture, they're smart enough to know that the extra $600 is only a temporary situation, and we're not going to be in this situation forever. And they're gonna understand the benefit of wanting to get back to work sooner rather than later.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. And, I guess one of the, comments people have is that obviously if you offer someone their job back, are they able to claim the 600, are they able to stay on unemployment? And I think, just to address the concern, I think a lot of people, due to the volume of unemployment right now, it will be probably challenging for the federal government to be and state government to be managing all that, and there may be people who could slip through the cracks, and that's the concern people have. But obviously, technically.
Yeah, and there are legitimate concerns for people that aren't ready to come back to work. We have some employees that do have some underlying health issues, so I'm not going to rush those people back. And we also have some folks that have legitimate childcare issues. We're not going to rush those people back. But the people that are ready and able to come back to work, we're going to welcome them.
Very good. It looks like we've gotten through most of the questions. I think that, obviously there's a lot of concerns about people moving the goalposts. I guess, Jeff, maybe I'll rephrase one of the comments made, but in your mind, what does the governor's sort of movement on changing the goalposts, and what does yellow mean? What does green mean? How does that specifically impact you as a business owner and your ability to plan for the future?
Well, we're fortunate that we can ramp up pretty quickly, and we already have a plan in place to do so. I mentioned we had a meeting with our managers yesterday. We went over that plan with them. We're going to open one store at a time. And in that store, we're going to have all of our managers working that store with some of our best staff. And we're going to operate that for a week or so, work out any of the kinks and bugs in the system, and then we're going to peel off one manager and take that knowledge and move that to the next store. And then a week or two later, finally, the third store. So we're able to ramp up pretty quickly. And if the governor told us today that in a week or so we could open with certain capacity restrictions, we'd be able to do so. We're prepared for that. Now, I tell you that I have a lot of friends in the restaurant industry, and there are a lot more moving pieces in that industry, and they certainly need more time to figure out the kinks in their operation and how they're going to be able to comply with all of the new challenges that are thrown at them. So not every business is the same in that regard, which is kind of the problem with this whole situation. Is Governor Wolf is kind of treating all of us with a certain sledgehammer and really just absolutely crushing us.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine, Mike and Jeff, what it would be like to be a restaurant owner in this type of a situation, because you already have all the normal requirements, but just not knowing how many people are coming in, what should your order patterns be for food. One of the big costs in the restaurant world is food spoilage and what have you. So how do you know how to plan? So it just, as you think about what people are going to be going through, it's mind-numbing, and the restaurant business is very tough to begin with. So it's going to be very challenging for people to just keep their head above water, because it's hard for them to do that in a normal environment, let alone in this environment. So it's going to be just mind-boggling what they're going to be faced with as they try to come out and work through this.
Well, thanks for that comment, John. I guess another question for you, how do you see, and it speaks specifically to Pennsylvania, but in general with these states, how's Pennsylvania going to make up the impending revenue shortfall that's been caused by the governor's decision to keep the economy shut down for over 2 months, getting closer to 3 months? How's the state going to operate? Obviously, unlike the federal government, they can't just print money. They have to have, a balanced budget at the end of the day. What's the solution there? Obviously there's some people calling for the federal government to bail out the states and because the COVID situation wasn't their fault. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think what will happen is that, yes, I think the states will try to do whatever they can to apply pressure on the federal government to provide some form of bailout. We've already seen it. That's part of the HEROES Act, so there'll be some negotiation there. So I think that there'll be an attempt there. Not that I'm necessarily in favor of that, I'm not. Governor Wolf is the one who shut the economy down in Pennsylvania. I think Governor Wolf needs to deal with this. I don't think there's 49 other states that should bail him out. I think he needs to own that. I think in addition to that, though, what I anticipate is that there will probably be some attempt here in Pennsylvania to raise certain taxes to generate more income. I also would suspect that what they will ultimately end up doing is covering the shortfall through some type of a debt instrument. They've been doing that for years. They will look at this as a one-off, and we need to borrow $5 billion or whatever it turns out to be in order to get us back to the other side of the economy opening up. So that's, if I had to put $1,000 on it today, I think they'll do it through a debt instrument, but I think you'll see them trying to get money from the federal government and look to see where they can raise taxes to do that. And, this might be another ploy now for, okay, let's have a severance tax on gas. So that's the type of thing I would think we'll start to see in the coming weeks.
Well, thank you, John. I think we're approaching the end of the allotted hour we have here, and I think we've touched on virtually all the questions that have been submitted at this point. So I guess I'd like to thank Jeff for his time and for his willingness to come on and share his story. It's not easy to discuss when you have difficulties in your business, but I know that everyone who's attending today and those who are going to watch after the fact appreciate you coming forward and explaining to people just how difficult this economy has been for you. And I guess I'd like to just turn it back over to John for any final comments you might have, John.
Sure. Yes, I'd like to echo what Mike said. Really, Jeff, really appreciate you coming on and being a guest. But even more so, I appreciate the way that you're approaching this. It's extremely responsible. It's extremely professional. And I think what you shared with us today gives people a good view of how the vast majority of business owners are approaching it. And I think that should give us confidence that, yes, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can reopen, we can do it safely because there's so many people out there like you that are taking this very seriously and doing the right things. And as I've talked for the last 2 or 3 weeks, we have demonstrated, whether it's in an industrial environment or whether it's even in a healthcare, an assisted living type of environment, if you do the right things, if you don't take shortcuts, if you follow them religiously, you can have a near perfect outcome. So again, we need to do it. We can do it. Now we need to do it. Just do it and move on with this. So my last parting word, Mike, is, again, folks, we talk in terms of Republican and Democrat. In this case, I think it's all of us working together. We talk in terms of the Democrat reps and the Democrat senators because they're the ones who are voting with Governor Wolf and not overriding his vetoes. But when you talk about the small business owners, everyone who's being impacted by this, it's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's not independent, it's all of us. So what I hope that's why I say we have to apply maximum pressure to those who are blocking this, which are the Democrat reps and the Democrat senators. So as we go away from here, if there's one takeaway, I would encourage all of you, and it doesn't have to be your rep, it can be the next one over. If you think about just Chester County, there's what, 4, 5, or 6? So there's plenty of people to call, write letters to editors, apply the pressure, and hopefully that will mount quickly, and that Wolf will get the message that they will no longer stand behind it. I don't think it will ever come to an override. I think behind the scenes they will tell him, and then he will find some way of signing a piece of legislation. But that's only going to happen if we put enough pressure on to overcome all the pressures that are being brought to bear from the other side. So with that, we will have another session next Saturday. I don't know exactly what the topic is. It very likely will be some facet of either reopening Pennsylvania or something to do with the stances that Tom Wolf has taken during this time frame. So again, we thank you for being with us today, being part of this. If you do have any other questions that come up, send them along to our website. We will respond to those. And I think with that, we'll wrap up. Have a great rest of your day today and a great weekend. And hopefully next week brings a little bit brighter picture as we try to reopen Pennsylvania. Thank you all.
Thank you everyone for attending. This concludes John's Town Hall. We encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can also visit our website at www.emmonsforcongress.com. Thank you very much and have a wonderful weekend.